evening. I'm Haylee Ficuciello, and this is Englebrook Independent News Federal Crime Report, bringing you the most significant federal cases from across the United States Midwest District Court as we close out March of 2026. Tonight, disturbing crimes against children, corruption inside law enforcement, international drug trafficking operations worth hundreds of millions, and a sweeping series of federal indictments tied to narcotics, firearms, fraud, and immigration violations. We begin tonight in Minnesota with a case that federal prosecutors describe as a prolonged, calculated, and deeply disturbing. In Minneapolis, a registered sex offender has been sentenced to decades behind bars after exploiting a minor over a span of years. Federal officials announced that Robert James Levy has been sentenced to 324 months, that's 27 years in federal prison, for the production of child pornography. According to court documents, Levy targeted a 12-year-old girl beginning in February of 2022. Posing as a teenage boy, he catfished the victim, exchanging more than 112,000 messages and manipulated her into believing she was in a relationship. Over the course of 3 years, Levy coerced the victim into producing and sending sexually explicit material across state lines. Even more troubling, Levy continued exploiting the victim after being convicted in 2024 of second-degree criminal sexual conduct in Minnesota and while on probation. Federal prosecutors say the abuse persisted despite his status as a registered sex offender, highlighting what they described as a complete disgrace to the law and to the victim. In Wisconsin, a former police officer now headed to federal prison for what prosecutors calls a brazen betrayal of his oath. Joanne Madlock, a former Milwaukee police officer, has been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Federal investigators say Madlock provided ammunition to a convicted felon, possessed an illegal automatic weapon, and actively assisted a violent street gang. He also lied to the FBI, but that was just only the beginning. According to prosecutors, Madlock went even further, sending photos of fellow officers to gang members, offering to sell rifles, advising wanted suspects on how to evade law enforcement, and most critically, directing gang members to rival locations, knowing that violence and potential murder would follow. The government described his action as an aggravated and brazen, emphasizing he knowingly endangered the public while betraying both the badge and his colleagues. In Detroit, Michigan, a massive international drug trafficking operation dismantled, with ties spanning continents. Blaine Donnelly, a 48-year-old Albanian national, has been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison after being convicted of multiple cocaine trafficking and money laundering conspiracies. Federal prosecutors say Donnelly led a global drug networking responsible for moving thousands of kilograms of cocaine between South America, Europe, and the United States. Between 2019 and 2020 alone, law enforcement seized more than 4,300 kilograms of cocaine linked to his organization, with a street value exceeding $100 million. In one of the most sophisticated elements of the operation, investigators revealed plans of an underwater drone system designed to transport cocaine attached to commercial cargo ships across the Atlantic. The drugs would then be released offshore and retrieved by fishing vessels, a method prosecutors say underscored the evolving tactics of international drug cartels. In Ohio, multiple federal cases highlight large-scale narcotic trafficking and immigration violations. A Cleveland man, Marcus Hooper, has been indicted following a year-long investigation into drug trafficking operations across the region. Federal agents recovered more than 15 pounds of MDMA, nearly 12 pounds of cocaine, crack cocaine, fentanyl, marijuana, over $211,000 in cash, and drug manufacturing equipment. If convicted, Hooper faces significant prison time. In a separate case, 12 previously removed foreign nationals from Mexico, Honduras, and Guatemala have been indicted for illegally re-entering the United States across northern Ohio. Federal authorities say each individual has prior removal orders and re-entered without authorization. Also in Ohio, Trevon Robinson of Akron sentenced to more than 10 years in prison for trafficking methamphetamine and fentanyl while on parole. Investigators recovered 450 grams of meth, fentanyl, cash, and a firearm. Robinson, a repeat offender, was designated a career criminal under federal sentencing guidelines. In Illinois, a mix of violent crimes and high-level financial fraud, authorities arrest George Hebral Jr., accused of robbing a bank of O'Fallon after presenting a demand note and fleeing on foot. Police identified him through public tips and confirmed he was already on federal probation for prior bank robberies. Meanwhile, in Chicago, a major fraud indictment involving millions of dollars. Tatiana Baser is accused of defrauding victims out of at least $3.5 million, falsely claiming funds would support immigration services, Ukraine-related projects, and personal emergencies. Prosecutors say the fabricated documents and even impersonating FBI agents and attorneys to keep victims from reporting the scheme. She has pled not guilty. A court hearing is scheduled for April 21st. In Missouri, a shocking conspiracy involving staged violent crimes to exploit U.S. immigration systems. Oscar Gutser, a Mexican national, has pled guilty to participating in a scheme that staged armed robberies to individuals who could frequently obtain U visas, which are reserved for crime victims. Participants paid thousands of dollars to be listed as victims, while co-conspirators carried out fake robberies involving firearms and staged assaults. In a separate case, Daniel Liblins sentenced to 11 years for illegally firearm possession after fleeing from police. Brandon Haywood sentenced to 20 years for drug trafficking and firearm offense. Both had extensive prior felony records. And finally, in Kentucky, where federal courts handed down sequence sentences in both firearm and fraud cases, Quanton Ebel, 22, has been sentenced to 5 years in prison for possession of firearm as a convicted felon, with evidence linked to drug activity. And in Lexington, a deeply disturbing breach of trust. Donald Wolfer Jr., a mortician apprentice, has been sentenced to 34 months in prison after using personal information of deceased individuals to defraud a charity. He submitted fake funeral expenses, including claims involving deceased children, ultimately stealing nearly $12,000. From crimes against children to corruption with the law enforcement to global drug trafficking networks and systematic fraud, these cases underscore the breadth and complexity of federal crimes across the Midwest. They also highlight the consistent theme, the increasing sophisticated criminal operation, and the ongoing challenges for federal authorities working to dismantle them. I'm Haylee Ficuciello, and this has been your Englebrook Independent News Federal Crime Report. From the courtrooms to the streets, we continue bringing you the facts that matter. Good night.